Good evening. On behalf of the Islesboro Forum Committee, welcome to the 5th program of the 2021 Islesboro Forum Speaker Series. I'm Gail Jackson, the moderator of today's program. This is our 29th year of presenting distinguished speakers to the island community. Last week, we celebrated having our first program of the summer in person at the community center, and our first in-person program since August of 2019. But this week, we had to announce that our in-person plans had changed, and we would be doing this program on Zoom webinar only, given concerns about the uptick in COVID-19 cases nationally. I hope we managed to get our message out so that no one is descending on the community center at this time, expecting to find the forum there. At the end of today's program, I'll speak a bit more about our plans for our final 2 programs on August 15th and 22nd. Please check out our website, islesboroforum.org, for our complete calendar. Before I introduce our speaker, I also want to acknowledge and thank the 7 other committee members for their excellent support and ideas, and our technical producer, Michael Hutcherson. Their names are listed on the website. Please consider making a contribution to the forum. Our costs for 7 programs will be about $1,500. We hope you will want to make a donation to help cover our costs. A quick reminder as to our format: once our speaker has completed his remarks, we will have time for Q&A. As you think of questions, please type them into the Q&A function on the bottom right of the Zoom webinar screen. Hit the enter button and the moderator will restate your question for our speaker to answer. Now, it is my pleasure to ask Islesboro Forum Committee member Bruce Claflin to introduce tonight's speaker, a figure on PBS NewsHour known to so many of us as the person who makes complex science topics intelligible, interesting, and exhilarating, especially in the realms of space exploration, aviation, and transportation broadly. Over to Bruce Claflin for the introduction.
Thanks, Gail, and good evening, everyone. Miles O'Brien had the kind of career I dreamed of as a little boy. For nearly 17 of his 39 years in the news business, he was a staff correspondent and anchor with CNN. He served as the science, environment, and aerospace correspondent and the anchor of various programs, including American Morning. And while at CNN, Miles secured a deal with NASA to become the first journalist to fly on the space shuttle. The project ended with the loss of Columbia and her crew in 2003, a story he told to the world in a critically acclaimed 16-hour marathon of live coverage. He later served for 10 years as a member of the NASA Advisory Council, offering strategic advice to the NASA administrator. He's currently the science correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, a producer, director, writer, and correspondent for the PBS documentary programs NOVA and FRONTLINE, and an aviation analyst from CNN. He's won numerous awards over the years, including 6 Emmys, a Peabody, and a DuPont. Please welcome my friend, Miles O'Brien.
Bruce, thank you, and Gail, thank you. And really, I have looked forward so much to being with you in person on the coast of Maine at this time of year. And unfortunately, we're still battling the pandemic. That's the subject of another talk and another movie, I guess. But tonight, I wanted to tell you a little bit about something that is really hits on 2 areas of interest and expertise and concern. For me, I'm a pilot. Both of my grandfathers were general aviation pilots, so I guess it's pretty wired into my DNA. And I'm also a correspondent who has spent a lot of time covering the climate crisis. And when you put those 2, that interest and that concern together, aviation and climate, you start scratching your head pretty quickly about how to decarbonize that particular piece of the transportation pie. And so without knowing much about what was going on, I just started turning over rocks, as it were, doing some research, calling people to see what there was, what the alternative was, what the aviation community writ large was thinking about as it thought about moving beyond fossil fuels someday. It seemed to me this would probably be about the last transportation mechanism that you could walk away from with fossil fuels. And that might be true, but a lot of work is being done right now to hasten all of that. So I'll tell you what, Michael, why don't you put up the title slide of the film that I don't know if you all saw the film. This might be a little repetitive, so I apologize for that, but I'm going to do kind of a live version of the film we just released for NOVA in May. I called it The Great Electric Airplane Race. And so let's walk through it. What you will learn is, it really actually surprised me how far along all this is. And, there's a lot of developments in technology that seem like they're about to happen. We could talk about maybe fusion or something, but they always seem to be about 10 years off. I think this one is closer than you might think. And but I'm very interested in your thoughts and questions after I lay out what I've discovered. So let's talk about the climate emergency. We'll go to slide 2 there, Michael. We all know the climate emergency is here and now. I mean, you guys, Gulf of Maine, that is a place that is really right. Canary in the coal mine comes to mind. It is warming faster than any body of water on the planet. So, the lobsters are moving north, and eventually that will not be a part of the Gulf of Maine at the way things are going. Greenhouse gas carbon dioxide, it's at the highest level it's been in 800,000 years, well over 400 parts per million. We know this is an existential crisis. We see the evidence all the time, whether it's hurricanes or fires. And looking at the causes of this, we know it is human created. 15% of the human carbon footprint now comes from transportation. We're seeing signs of progress. Electric cars are kind of reaching the tipping point now, I think we can all agree on, and the prices are starting to drop. But let's talk about aviation. It's probably the hardest transportation problem to solve. And yet all over the world, we've discovered engineers, entrepreneurs, aviators doing what they can to try to meet that challenge. And they are rethinking how an aircraft is designed in very fundamental ways. It's not as simple as just putting an electric motor where you might have a turbine or jet engine. Electric motors are so fundamentally different and so small and powerful for their weight and responsive that you can imagine distributing them all over an aircraft, numerous motors all over an aircraft, which allow you to replace control surfaces like ailerons, stabilizers, and rudders, which are drag inducers. So, you get the thrust quotient out of the spinning propeller without the induced drag. They are experimenting, starting small, creating some flying machines like we've never seen before. And I do believe this is going to happen a lot faster than you imagine. If you fly on small commuter airlines today, Cape Air is a leader in this, by the way, so I know many of you fly on that one. You can expect some version of electric aircraft in the next 5 years. The next 5 years, that is for real. Now, let's talk about aviation and climate. Before the pandemic, aviation accounted for about 3.5% of the world's climate warming problem. About 2/3 of jet fuel exhaust is CO2. Less than 1% are nitrogen oxides, which also cause warming. The other third is, interestingly, and was a surprising one to me. You might need to restart that, Michael. The other third is mostly water vapor, which at high altitude becomes ice crystals. There's your 3.5%. This is the part about the nitrogen oxides. I got a little ahead of my graphics there. The other third, water vapor. You would think that wouldn't be a problem, but those are ice crystals, which we call contrails. When the humidity is right, contrails spread and linger for hours, creating cirrus clouds. And thousands of flights, creating thousands of contrail-induced clouds, trap a lot of heat. Now listen to this, they have about twice the impact on global warming as the CO2 from jet exhaust. And the problem overall is getting worse. Global aviation is growing very rapidly. It is predicted to double in less than 20 years. Those are pre-pandemic predictions, but we're going to get back to business here. We already are in many respects. And other forms of transport are investing more heavily in green alternatives and have been. And if that trend continues, aviation is going to become one of the top polluters of all the industry sectors. It'll become, the final dinosaur that if it doesn't clean up its act, and it needs to begin acting now. And of course, with the long lead times in aviation, now is really decades down the road. Let's talk about weight and aviation. This is a weighty issue. Let's talk about the weight of jet fuel. A Boeing 737, it can hold about 40,000 pounds of fuel. Sounds like a lot, I guess. But to replace the jet engines with electric motors and batteries, you would need 30 times the weight, or 1.2 million pounds of batteries, to get comparable range. Okay, that aircraft is never going to fly, 1.2 million pounds. So solving that challenge is daunting, to say the least. But some really interesting baby steps have already been taken. In 2003, Bertrand Piccard co-founded the Solar Impulse project in Switzerland. I assume you guys knew a little something about that. The goal was to design and build a solar electric aircraft that could fly around the world, about the weight of a car. It flew at the speed of a moped. It took them a long time. One pilot, no passengers. We're talking baby steps here, but they did, and it took a while, 16 months. They had several mishaps along the way, but they did in fact circumnavigate the planet. Here's Bertrand Piccard.
What I wanted to do was to show that electric aviation had also a future, and that the technologies already exist. It's not something that we can do in 100 years. We can do it now, and actually we did it. Today, all the people who say a clean aviation is impossible will look as stupid as the one who said to the Wright brothers, your airplane will never fly.
A bold statement from Mr. Piccard. Let's go now to Chandler Airport in Fresno, California. Speaking of the Wright brothers, that airport has a history that goes back to that very era. I guess you could call what happened there aviation 1.0. There is another revolution underway now. We'll call it aviation 3.0, 2.0 being jets. And at this particular airport, Joseph Oldham, who runs a flight school there and is an avid pilot, is launching kind of a new age of flight and a new lease on life for this old faded glory of an airport. These are Pipistrel Alpha Electros. These are the first certified all-electric airplanes in the world. He's got 4 of them in his hangar. And most important for me on this adventure of doing a film in the middle of COVID, we didn't get to do many fun shoots, but I did get to sit in the right seat and get a flight and take a listen to what that was like.
4 Alpha Romeo, go ahead and roll. 4 Alpha Romeo rolling.
It's interesting, it doesn't vibrate in the same way.
Yeah, it's just very comfortable and very relaxing. Electric propulsion systems are so simple that really there's just nothing that you really need to be that concerned about.
Are we flying the future right now?
We absolutely are.
It was a hazy day, the result of some raging wildfires nearby. A reminder of the climate emergency, which makes the decarbonization of aviation so urgent.
How important do you think that is to think about taking fossil fuels out of aviation over the long run?
Well, it's huge. It's the only mode of transportation that really has not moved aggressively towards zero emission.
That was a fun ride with Joseph. He got the money to purchase those planes by applying for a grant from Fresno County. The grant simply asked for ideas to demonstrate advanced transportation and technology. And of course, he felt the planes were the perfect example of that. He also used some of the money to put charging stations at airports within the short range of that aircraft. And he thinks there might be a transportation piece of this, even with 2 seats and a small battery. The company that makes this airplane is based in Slovenia. Pipistrel is a pioneer of electric aviation. The founder, Ivo Boscarol, started tinkering with ultralight trikes in the 80s. You saw him bearded there in the 80s. He's quite a pioneer in all this. He designed these electric airplanes to be flight trainers for new pilots. And Joseph Oldham is thinking along the same way. He is waiting for FAA approval to start a flight school with these planes. He thinks the reduced maintenance and the reduced fuel cost, of course, provide an opportunity to bring a more diverse population into the world of aviation. But let's get real here. 2 seats, 1 hour of flight before the battery runs out. The Alpha Electro is a case in point of where we are in this. It's still in its infancy. It's a long way from this little guy to, a long haul jetliner. The flight path between the two, pardon me, may very well be wending its way through a small hangar in Camarillo, California. There's a startup there called Ampere. And what it's been doing, it's trying to make the Prius of aviation. It has modified a 1974 Cessna 337, a Skymaster, which is a twin engine. It's a push-pull configuration. They replaced the forward piston engine with an electric motor, added a 600-pound battery pack to the belly, and decided to call it the Eel, the hybrid Eel. And they've flown dozens of test flights. The electric motor does most of its work on takeoff and through the climb to altitude. And then the piston engine takes over for the brunt of the descent. This is what you call a parallel hybrid vehicle. Fuel costs, they say, are reduced 20 to 30% by taking one of those engines out. And they say the maintenance bills will be cut in half. Now, not long after this test flight that we documented, they took the Eel to Hawaii, and they partnered with Mokulele Airlines to see how it handles commuter airline operations. And this is an important point. If you're going to be a useful transportation platform for a commuter airline, you need to be able to handle the short turnarounds between flights, the frequent flights, which at this point, charging may make that not so practical for some airlines. Now, Ampere hopes the next step will be a 19-seat converted Twin Otter. It will have 2 electric motors that run on batteries, and they will be charged by an onboard turbine engine. That's what we call a series hybrid, meaning the fossil fuels are only generating power to sustain the batteries and the electric motors. In some of the regional markets, airlines are, hard pressed. They're going out of business. You know what it's like to fly on a Cape Air Cessna 402. A lot of the aircraft are old and the profit margins are very thin. Electric aviation could really be a game changer for some of these shorter hops where the range of batteries suffices. But let's think about something a little more in the realm of, I grew up with the Jetsons. I suppose many of you did. We've always imagined the flying car, maybe not the one that folds up into a suitcase like George Jetson's, but imagine that world for a moment, because that is actually also closer than you think. It may actually be easier to solve than some of the problems with commuter aviation. Now, this is a scene from China. A startup there called Ehong is testing the waters. They're basically overgrown drones, for lack of a better expression, but they're big enough to fly people, a couple of people, on sightseeing tours. They've been doing this 10-minute runs. They say they've flown several thousand passengers. It's called the Ehong 216. It carries 2 passengers, has 16 propellers, 216. It says it can carry 485 pounds up to 80 miles an hour for about 20 miles. Now, that's not going to change the face of transportation, but it is proving one thing very interesting. People are willing to get in this thing, thousands of them so far, without a pilot. It's all automated. It's all remotely automated and monitored. They have a lot of competition. Now, in China, they don't have the regulations which make it difficult for US companies to do what they've been doing, flying passengers. But there's a lot of activity, particularly in the Silicon Valley area. And I'll tell you how this all began. It begins with the story of the Puffin. An aeronautical engineer at NASA at the time, Mark Moore, sparked a lot of the thinking when in 2009, he designed this concept vehicle called the Puffin, single person electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, kind of opened the door to what electric vertical takeoff and landing could possibly be. And one of the people who happened to be fascinated by the Puffin was Google co-founder Larry Page. And soon after he saw it, he began investing heavily in personal electric aircraft projects. He's done a bunch of them. At a ranch south of Silicon Valley, he has a small startup there called Kitty Hawk, and they're flight testing these vehicles. It's a single seat electric aircraft they call Heaviside. The company is led by entrepreneur and computer scientist Sebastian Thrun. You may be familiar with him. He's got a fairly high profile in the tech world. He invited us for a rare peek, and he gave me a pretty slick pitch. Listen to this.
It sounds crazy. Yeah, but we believe it's the future of transportation for everybody. If you put the car in the air, there's no obstacle, you're in a straight line, you're not in anyone's way, you don't need roads anymore, you're more energy efficient, you're faster, and you're safer. Why would people not want that?
Yeah, why not, right? It's an electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. eVTOL is the term of art. The propellers pivot the thrust from horizontal to vertical, allowing the craft to take off and land on a dime, hover, and still, when the props are situated in the right way, fly 180 miles an hour. The Kitty Hawk team is flight testing, and they are aiming to be certified for piloted flight by the FAA. They built over 100 fully functioning prototypes over the last few years, 30,000 individual flights. Now, Thrun believes the way to reconcile his big dream of a Heaviside in every driveway with safety is automation. He believes people without a full piloting skill set and without certification should be able to hop into these vehicles, punch their target address, and just get there, like George Jetson, right? Sebastian Thrun is a pioneer in the development of autonomous cars. He's the founder of Google's self-driving car project. And the Waymo project, he says self-flying aircraft are actually an easier challenge. All the stuff you might hit in a car, from the bicyclist to the shopping cart, to the playing child, to the curb, to the shrub, to the, well, you name it. Once you're 500 feet above the ground, you've got nothing to hit. So interesting thought there. They're making progress there. But again, that's a single person vehicle. That's going to be for probably for some rich hobbyists, at least initially. The current leader in the race to fill the void, the world with electric air taxis, in other words, multiple passengers, is a company called Joby Aviation, Santa Cruz, California, founded by Joe Ben Bevert in 2009. Get to know this guy. I think he's going to be a name similar to like Elon Musk down the road here. The aircraft he and his team designed is now in flight testing, also for FAA certification. It carries a pilot and 4 passengers, 6 tilting motors. You notice it's much bigger blades on those rotors. That's to keep it quieter. He says it can fly 200 miles an hour with a range of 150 miles. Now, Joby, not unlike Elon Musk, is extremely vertically integrated. It tests, builds almost all of its own components, builds everything itself. Kind of gives you a new way of thinking about vertical integration, I guess. Much of the work has been done in secret, in a barn, in a secluded property in the Redwoods in Santa Cruz. But the goal is to have an aircraft initially certified with a pilot. It's flown that way a number of times, but still a lot of remote control flying. We watched one of the tests. It was fascinating. They did not let us film it with our own cameras, interestingly. So all this footage you see of it flying is their own footage. But what I heard with my own ears was very impressive. It's much quieter than a helicopter. Obviously, if you're just trying to, redo the helicopter world, you're not going to succeed. That's only for the rich, and the noise upsets a lot of people. On paper, Joby, which just went public in a SPAC, has about $6.6 billion in investment to play with. Toyota is one of their lead investors. The company hopes to have aircraft certified by 2023. That's very aggressive, of course, but they're pretty far along. Joe Ben Beveridge says he wants this vehicle at launch to be comparable to the price of a taxi. So clearly they're thinking about market share here. He hopes that the cost will go down to the cost of personal car ownership over subsequent years. Let's listen to Joe Ben.
The impact that we want to have in order to transform the way everyone moves every day, we will need to make millions of these. Our mission is to save 1 billion people an hour a day.
Okay, millions of these, 1 billion people an hour a day. Start doing the math in your head and start imagining what the skies might look like. How could that possibly be safe, right? We don't want them bumping into either us, buildings, or other vehicles. Eventually, autonomous air taxis will need to do all this autonomously. But at NASA's Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley, they're tackling this problem, and it's fascinating. They're looking at how you allow these vehicles to navigate in urban environments autonomously and safely in every respect. But think about it. Before COVID, there were more than 45,000 flights every day in the US. And that is an intricate ballet that is conducted by air traffic controllers, right? And the idea of a control tower is it's not going to fly, quite literally, in this environment with that many players. So you got to rethink how these vehicles stay out of each other's hair. Sandy Lazito is the chief of aviation systems division at Ames.
We do not necessarily expect a centralized air traffic control tower to do it with individual directives telling the pilots how to come in and out of the vertiport. And so that's a very different operation. There could be much more independence on the part of the pilots and the individual operators as they move in and out of these areas.
Okay, so independence, that doesn't sound very reassuring, does it? That sounds like a prescription for disaster. But NASA has been working on this actually for several years in the world of drones, as they're trying to certify drones for commercial usage. They've been looking at this idea of autonomous collision avoidance, and those lessons are being applied now for these vehicles in urban environments. Lozito and her team are using that data to build algorithms that will allow air traffic control to be more digital and more automated and distributed, and really taking the human being directly out of the loop, much more in a supervisory kind of role. In-flight, an air taxi would continuously transmit its location to receivers on the ground. And this actually dovetails with a lot of improvements that the FAA has incorporated into the air traffic control system in recent years. So that's not too much of a stretch. The big question is, you predict a volume, a time, and a place. And the question is, are they in that tube at that time as they were predicted by their flight plan? And if not, then you get into all kinds of collision avoidance modes that would be autonomous, and each vehicle would have that on board and would be interrogating each other. But it's one thing to do this at low altitudes. It still has to somehow be a part of the existing system. And then there's the issues of security. Imagine all that real-time life and death data being shared on the cloud, essentially. So a lot of work needs to be done there. The good news is we're not going to have millions of these right away, and we can ease our way into this, but it is a challenge that needs to be met. So I told you at the beginning that electrification can give us a clean sheet idea of how an aircraft is designed. So think about the wing on a typical little airplane like this. They're not optimized for speed, and that's deliberate. the faster air moves over wing, the more lift it provides, right? And the greater the surface area of the wing, the more lift it can create. So for safety's sake, wings are made wide enough to provide adequate lift at slow speeds on approach, right? That makes sense. But once an airplane is at altitude and levels off, starts flying faster, all that extra lift from the fat wing is no longer needed, and you create a lot of drag. The extra surface area makes the plane less efficient. So if you made a wing narrower, it would reduce drag, but airspeed would have to increase in order to compensate for that. So to get out of this dilemma, electric motors offer an interesting solution. They're so lightweight that they can be put all over the wing on that narrow wing. And even at slower speeds, the extra airflow from the propellers themselves add enough lift. So in a way, you're kind of tricking the wing into thinking it's flying faster than it really is. This allows engineers to do a clean sheet on aviation. NASA is flying now its first piloted X-plane in more than 20 years, the X-57 Maxwell, which is an electric project. And they're exploring the advantages of what they call distributed electric propulsion. They've taken an existing piston engine aircraft seen there, and they put a new wing on it. The wing is 40% of the width of the regular slow speed wing that it replaces. It's a huge reduction in drag. They'll put 14 electric motors running across the wing. Once leveled off, the 12 smaller motors will be shut down and the props will be folded back so they are feathered, as we like to call it in aviation, so they don't provide any sort of drag, and it will fly on the two outboard motors. Now, it's a challenging project, but the point was made in 2016, and this is something I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about. The batteries, lithium-ion batteries, have their weaknesses, and there you see it. They stress the battery pack purposely in, fortunately, a test bed to see what would happen. And that is what happens if you don't protect the battery cells from what's called thermal runaway. So what do? They reached out to their friends in Houston who make a lot of the power tools for the International Space Station for the spacewalking astronauts who are obviously very concerned about this issue. And they use that to completely redesign their power pack in order to hopefully prevent these thermal runaways. So hopefully that collaboration will lead to safer battery packs, not just for Maxwell, but for the entire industry. So, if you're thinking about, when are we going to ever fly these things transcontinental or transoceanic, the transport class dream, to carry hundreds of passengers, tons of cargo. We need range, speed, and payload, and those batteries, we saw they have their weaknesses. And they come up short. Batteries improve about 5% a year. It's not Moore's law, but it's a steady 5%. But there's still such a big gap that it will take at least a decade for them to catch up, and maybe not ever. So can we decarbonize aviation a little sooner? In Stuttgart, Germany, there's a really interesting project underway. An electrical engineer by the name of Joseph Kahlo is working with a startup called H2 Fly, and they're making airplanes that run on hydrogen. Now, these are fuel cells. Fuel cells, as you all probably know, they generate electricity through an electrochemical reaction. Once again, this goes back to some space technology. A lot of this the technology was pushed for the Apollo program to generate electricity on the capsules as they went to space. Same for the shuttle. Hydrogen reacts with incoming oxygen. It generates electricity. The current powers the electric motors. The byproduct is water. Hydrogen has 3 times more energy density than jet fuel. But it is the lightest molecule of all. And at atmospheric temperature and pressure, we know it's a gas, and so it takes up a lot of volume. So there's the challenge. The engineering challenge is, how do you make it compact enough? It gets very cold when it's compact and liquefied. And it does have a problem with the fact that the flow of energy out of these cells doesn't provide enough oomph. Excuse the non-technical term, for takeoff. And so this aircraft that they developed uses batteries to provide the energy, the specific energy required at takeoff. and then fuel cells for the rest of the mission. It offers a lot more range, and that's the key here. Callow and his team have been at it for about 13 years. And this version that you're seeing, this aircraft, is its sixth generation. The batteries are there for takeoff. The rest is hydrogen. In November of last year, Callow says they flew it more than 30 times, and they have validated a range of 500 miles. He believes hydrogen fuel cells could provide enough range, power, et cetera, for 80 to 100 seat aircraft with a range of 3,500 kilometers in the near term. That's an interesting number, 3,500 kilometers. Almost half of the emissions from aviation today come from flights of less than 2,000 kilometers, 1,200 miles. So hydrogen, actually, if they could solve some of the problems of containerizing hydrogen, and I know you guys are thinking about the Hindenburg, but when you talk to these people in this business, they get very upset. They say, geez, that was 1930, give us a break. Technology has improved. But hydrogen actually could make a big dent. There are so many projects out there that it has the feel of a revolution, like Detroit in the early 1900s. Inventors are trying to define what these aircraft will look like, just as they were trying to define what the automobile would look like then. This hothouse of innovation really all over the globe. It started and stayed in garages in Detroit for a long time, and then it just popped out and changed the world overnight. The people in this industry, this nascent industry, are convinced we're at this kind of early Detroit moment, and that revolution is quite literally in the air. So I appreciate you listening to that, and I hope you'll actually watch the NOVA film too, if you don't mind. You can see it a little more dressed up version of that. But I'm here to take your questions on this. And I know I didn't talk about space, and that's part of the title. Maybe we can incorporate the space stuff in the questions, because I feel like I've been talking enough for now. And I'll turn it back over to Bruce and Gail.
All right, Miles, thank you very much. I found that thrilling. And given my somewhat advanced age, I'm comforted to know that some of this might be accessible within 10 years. I might still be around. So very exciting. Now I'm going to toss the mic to Bruce to ask you the first question, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, Miles, thanks very much. I was thinking about this from a standpoint of business, which is how do you get costs down such that you can make it affordable across multiple transportation platforms. And costs usually come down with volume. So the question is, what are the technologies that are being used in aerospace that could be applicable for cars, trucks, and trains? Or maybe I should ask in reverse, what's happening cars, trucks, and trains could be applicable in aerospace?
I think the reverse is the right way to think about it, Bruce. And I think, a really telling thing to me was seeing Toyota making its big bet on Joby. And the idea that, when you get a company that thinks in terms of, millions of units as opposed to, hundreds or dozens, right? Which is what we see in the aircraft industry. That's when things change. But it's really, you have to remember that the culture of aviation is bespoke for a lot of reasons, and at the top of the list is, of course, safety, right? And that has kept it from being a mass-produced product for a lot of reasons. And so what you have now is you have this interesting meeting of cultures. You've got kind of the Toyota mindset in the Joby world. You've got the Larry Page, Sebastian Thrun, Silicon Valley mindset, all kind of meeting the Wichita, Seattle group. And it's a very interesting clash of cultures. It's a Reese's peanut butter cup kind of thing. And the question is, when you come out of Silicon Valley, where you go fast and break things. But you got to be careful when you do that in the world of aviation. So how this all meets is a very exciting question. And obviously the FAA, the traditional aviation enterprises, are very leery of these these guys who gave us Instagram, trying to tell them how to fly their aircraft. So I do have a reasonable amount of faith that the FAA is going to figure this out, but they are learning as we are on all of this, because this is new.
All right, thank you for that very helpful answer. Now we have a question from an amateur ornithologist, Marilyn Smith, and she would like to know, how do these vehicles deal with birds?
They are at the bird level, and as the flyer, as a pilot who has flown airplanes at very low levels and has had to dodge birds, this is an interesting problem. If you have millions of these in the air, that could have some huge consequences. I honestly don't know if anybody's really done the hard studies on that. That might be something we should suggest.
All right, so Marilyn, stay tuned. We hope your birds will not be in danger.
That's a good one for a follow-up. I like that idea. I'm going to look into that.
Very good. Now, I've got a question about battery technology. I'm dismayed by your statistic that batteries improve about 5% per year. Who do you consider are the leaders in advancing battery technology that might be applicable for this purpose?
Well, on the commercial side of things, the Chinese are completely dominating battery production right now. So we as a country need to step up our game if we're going to stay in that racket. But there are areas of great expertise in this country. Argonne National Laboratory outside of Chicago is doing a really stellar work, way ahead of the market kind of work, exactly the kind of thing we should be funding with our federal tax dollars. But what's interesting about batteries is, it's unlike computers and the miniaturization of the silicon. Batteries are just, it's just kind of brute force chemistry. And what they really are still, after all these years, they're kind of doing trial and error, samplings of chemistries to see what goes well together and what might offer some level of improvement. They can speed up that process using, machine learning and computer virtual reality, artificial intelligence. But it is still a laborious process. And, one of the things we do need to consider as well is we have to figure out how to recycle all these batteries we're going to be using, not just in aviation. Lithium-ion batteries have all kinds of things in them, and it's very difficult to sort through all the materials to come up with a practical recycling regime. It's not like a lead acid battery, which are very easy to recycle and repurpose. So the good news is we still have a lot of smart people working on it here. If you're concerned about U.S. competitiveness, the Chinese are really starting to own this market in a big way.
Now, are the Germans also good leaders in recycling? They have laws that require them to take care of the entire life cycle of a product. And I wonder whether they are more advanced as a result of having that kind of approach to life cycle management.
That's a good question. I don't know exactly what they're doing on recycling lithium ion. That's another good one to follow up on. I'd like to see, because you're right. In Europe, there's much more pressure to have a cradle to grave approach to things. And here's my feeling on this. There are I counted the other day, I'd say at least 40 reasonably strong startups looking at lithium ion recycling. And this is like so many things. It will work the more batteries we have out there. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue. As more and more cars are out there, more and more lithium batteries are out there, there will be a business case for these companies to figure out how to recycle them, because there's rare earth metals. There's lithium itself is not a limitless resource. We want to capture these things back, and we just don't want to be landfilling more stuff. And all of us, I think, realize we've got to get out of this one-way economy that we have, whether it's plastics or batteries or you name it. And I think there will be enough market forces there to make that work. But it is a little bit chicken and egg right at the moment.
Right. So earlier you mentioned that the federal government was or should be doing more research in the area of battery technology. Can you speak to us a bit about your perspectives on this present administration's commitment to resources for basic scientific research, which has been pared back rather brutally in recent decades.
Yeah, it's really, you know, you can really almost take a straight line back to William Proxmire and the Golden Fleece days, right? And, you know, ever since then, the federal enterprise, whether it's National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, and the national labs themselves, have had to fight so hard to maintain that funding. You know, I was very hopeful that I haven't looked at the details of the latest infrastructure thing and to see where we stand on basic research. But, you know, it's not a cost, it's an investment in our economy. And I'm hopeful that this administration realizes it.
Yes. All right. We have a question from one of our listeners asking what the typical cost for the individual will be with one of these new air vehicles. You have any numbers that you could offer?
Well, I mean, nobody will give me an actual sticker price, but, you know, just taking what Joe Ben Bivard, who's, you know, probably as far ahead as anybody on this thing, would tell you, he says it should be, you know, he's going to drive the cost down to roughly the equivalent of a car. But what kind of car, right? Are we talking, we had a Maserati? I don't know. But I do think that idea of ownership versus using it in more like as an Uber is something to think about a little more. I think that's going to be potentially the way we find ourselves first using these vehicles. I think there's going to be enough push to get market share out there that I think that there will be inexpensive rides, probably loss leader type missions to get this thing jump started. But as to, you know, what it's going to cost you to have one in your driveway, it's anybody's guess.
Okay. Now, I think I saw Bruce waving his hand, so I'll let him speak up here.
Yeah, I'm picking up on a couple of things you said, Miles. You referenced the bill going through Congress now on infrastructure, and you talked about some of the issues with electric battery. As I see the bill going through Congress, it's a major commitment to the electrification of transportation on the road. But it seems as if it's predetermined that the answer is electricity with batteries, because it's all about charging stations and so forth. Yet you brought up all of the issues associated with lithiums, dirty chemical, got to be mined, limited, recycled. What is your thought on have we predetermined the winner as opposed to, say, hydrogen? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, we had in the George W. Bush era, we had a little hydrogen period of time when people were talking a lot about that. And it kind of fell out of fashion for various reasons that are too long to go into. I think it's time to look at that again. I really do. I think you have to be a little more agnostic about whether, you know, what's actually making this a zero emission vehicle. If you can figure out a way to put hydrogen on an aircraft, you can certainly do it for a vehicle on the road. And you know, that addresses a lot of the issues of, you know, the range anxiety that people have when it comes to these vehicles and so forth. But, you know, I think I think you're right. I think, you know, when the government starts, you know, making bets, they should be hedged a little bit, right? We shouldn't go all in too deep on a specific thing. You know, for all we know, somebody's going to come up with some sort of unobtainium battery that just completely revolutionizes this. And if we made everything too prescriptive, we might regret that in a big way.
All right. Is there any chance at all of miniaturizing nuclear power to the extent that it could be used for this purpose or for some other broader transportation purposes?
I don't know if that's a great idea. I doubt that would be an outstanding. I'm not sure about that one. Although, you know, we've got a rover on Mars now that's doing very well on nuclear power. A little piece of plutonium keeps it going nicely, right? I don't know. Maybe we should be more creative on that front.
Well, and don't forget our nuclear submarines.
Yeah.
So it's not as far-fetched.
You're absolutely. The cost of running those is a little bit, will slow you down a little bit, though.
Yeah. Well, that might be pie in the sky. But as long as we're up in the sky, we know that you are also very conversant with space technology and the current exploration that's going on in Mars, on Mars and elsewhere. Would you care to share some of your perspectives on that and how significant that is? Is it worth it for us to put billions and trillions of dollars into the effort to get man to Mars, for example?
Yeah, it's people always ask this question. They were asking this question during Apollo, of course, right? If we could, spend the millions, pick your world problem, and we'd be better off. And but I'll just one example that came up in this conversation: the fuel cell. The fuel cell, that technology was driven. That technology process was completely driven by the moon race. And I'm sure we'd have fuel cells regardless, but that process was focused and matured in a fashion which exceeded what the private sector would have done just by virtue of the fact that we wanted to make it small enough and safe enough to go to space. So there's all kinds of things that come out of these projects which we use. And I'm not talking about Tang and space food sticks. There's a lot of technology. The other thing which we shouldn't overlook is the human capital that comes out of it. These missions inspire young people in ways that does not appear in the bottom line very well.
Mhm.
But a lot of people who never end up designing rockets or going to the moon, a lot of people are inspired to take courses in math and science and engineering because it's cool, and they get to see the rover on Mars, or Elon Musk stacking up this giant starship the other day, which he one day would like to fly to Mars. So that in and of itself is good. And the other thing we have to remember is that a big part of space right now is looking back at our own planet, whether it's weather satellites, understanding climate change. There are no weather buoys in the West Antarctic ice sheet, and if you want to find out what's going on there, space is a pretty good place to do that. We could talk about GPS, communications satellites, and let's face it, we are one way or another, this planet has a finite lifespan. Okay. Eventually the sun's going to, swallow us up. That's a long time down the road, but it's nice to think about keeping humanity alive beyond our not just our planet, but our solar system. I know it's hard to even imagine that. And I know that sounds like a woo-woo concept. But it could happen sooner. An asteroid could come and clonk us, or we could just do it. We could just do it to ourselves with climate change. So I do believe it's really important to keep pushing outward, even as we face really existential problems right here at home, because it's not mutually exclusive. And frankly, I think it benefits the problems at home in ways that aren't obvious, but are there.
Mhm. Good. Well, you've convinced me. I'm on board.
Good.
You're very persuasive. So I'm curious as to what projects you have in your to-do list that you're currently working on, or that you are dreaming about working on. What are some of the next ones?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I have to confess to you all, when I was in Maine in the mid 80s, do you guys know where Wayne, Maine is? It's pretty near Augusta. And there's a lake there called Pocasset. And I was on that lake with my wife at the time, and it was kind of dusk, and I saw what we called then a UFO. And it's exactly what these guys that you've been seeing recently in the Navy fighters have been seeing. I mean, it kind of stood there, it was bright, and then it kind of moved, and then it took off at an impossible speed. My wife at the time will verify this. I wasn't even in deep cocktails. And so I've been very interested in this subject. And so, there's UFO, and then there's the search for extraterrestrial life. Okay, we could go down the Roswell path, and that gets you into all kinds of tinfoil hats pretty quickly. But the search for life beyond our planet is fascinating to me, and that's another good reason to be out there in space, is trying to find this. That's what they're trying to do on Mars right now. And so I'm proposing a story on the hunt for life outside our planet. I did a film on it for CNN back in the 90s, but I think it's time for an update. And it's infinitely fascinating to me when you go to the bottom of the ocean in those volcanic vents. They never see the light of day down there. And just by virtue of the fact that there's an energy source and water, you have life. So it really opens up your mind as to where life can be and how it exists. If there's liquid water everywhere we look on this planet, liquid water, we will find life, period. So imagine, going to a planet like Europa, which we know has a liquid ocean underneath that icy surface.
Mhm.
Is there some form of life there? And that profoundly changes the way I think about how we should think about our place in the universe, how we should think about whether we should be exploring the universe, and ultimately how important it is to protect our little spaceship right here.
Uh-huh. Good. Well, what's the timeline for the completion of this proposed project?
I'm just pitching. I'm in pitching mode. So, but there's, it's interesting. It's a really good time to be doing documentaries because of the streaming. And I hope you all are taking advantage of all the, we documentary filmmakers do not do it for the money. There's no question. It's a labor of love. And we have many more ways to get our films out to people. But, I invite you all to, however you can, support that process, because it is a labor of love, but there's a lot of really great filmmaking going on right now. It's kind of a golden era because the distribution models have changed so dramatically.
Yes, that's one of the beneficial unintended consequences of the pandemic. It has given us more opportunity to search for those things, and the people who make them are much more innovative about getting them out to the public. So that's all good. Is there a particular channel or distribution channel that you think is strong?
I don't want to hex it. I mean, my home is PBS, so I always like to, because
Right.
I feel very strongly about PBS in general.
Yes.
Because I feel like it's something we all should support. But I've had some conversations with Discovery, which has been very interesting. Discovery over the years on their cable channel became less and less interesting to me, frankly, because they had to go after an audience, and they were trying to, give you Naked and Afraid and Orange County Choppers and all that stuff, right? Shark Week, all that stuff.
Right.
But now they've got an over-the-top streaming service. And so all of a sudden they're going back to their roots, which was in fact, documentaries, science-based documentaries. So I'm hoping maybe I can do some work for them. We'll see. There's a lot of interest in this kind of content right now, which is nice. And if we can make the numbers work, we'll do it.
Yes, that I will definitely follow up and look at that. Now I'm looking at my clock, and we promised you that we would be prompt. We have about 2 more minutes, which I will consume with a little description of next week's program, Miles. But before I do that, I have to say what an enormous privilege it has been to have this conversation with you. I've always enjoyed your reporting, and being able to have this exchange and give and take has just been a great gift for our island and for our speaker series. And Bruce Claflin, we owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude, because I understand that the two of you are linked in some, I won't mention it, fraternal way. Are you going to get your bugle down, Bruce, and start playing?
Not on your life.
Okay. So Miles, thank you so much. And we wish you well. We know you have some family issues. You'll be on our minds and in our thoughts. And we thank you very much.
Gail and Bruce, thank you. My only disappointment is that I'm not there in person. I hope you'll give me a rain check for next year in person. We'll talk about the next film or whatever else. Maybe I'll have a film on birds and eVTOLs and how that's all going to work out, because that really actually was an interesting question. I got to think about that one. But it was an honor, and I'd love to see you in person next time if we can make that happen. And hey, shout out to Michael. Great job following along. We had that was worked out pretty well. So thank you for your help on that.
Yes, we're very fortunate to have Michael. Thank you. And I I can say we will give you a rain check in person. Absolutely.
All right, I'll be there.
All right,
All right.
all the best. Now you can sign off if you wish. I'm just going to describe next week's program.
I already know about it, so I'm going to sign off, but I'll be there. Take care.
Okay, excellent.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So for our next program on August 15th, we will present David Green, the president of Colby College, which I'm sure all of you know is a private liberal arts college in Waterbury, Maine. And it has been a perennial on the hot list of young college-bound people for years. Because of COVID concerns, this program will be via Zoom webinar only. Please register for the program at islesboroforum.org, and please join us next week. We look forward to seeing you then. Good night.